Let's look at the configuring, replication and failover and load balancing now. Lesson 10. So a number of topics to cover here. We will look about the sites and replication, how replication works, endpoint protection replication scenarios, configuring replication, replication logging, and failover and load balancing. So a bit about sites and replication. So defining a site. Remember, a site is all about how we wish to manage the certain geography of the clients. A site is all about where the database is. You may use sites to manage separate logical divisions. Maybe the topology-based bandwidth needs to have different sites. And it could be different types of IT solutions. You can have choices with the database. You could have used the embedded, which uses the Sybase, or the MS SQL option, where you could have an external SQL server or have SQL installed on the SEPM itself. To manage the sites, we come to our SEPM server. The server that's connected to the site is the local site. We can look at the replication partners here, any partner sites that have been set up as a partner replication to replicate the data with your current local site. So defining replication. Well, here we have an example of a London office, a Munich office, and a Paris office. Here we have the arrows showing that all replication data will go from the London out to the Paris and Munich offices, and Munich will replicate with London, and Paris will replicate with London. So the replication partner is the SEPM that is part of another site. You can manage your different replication partners, and you can choose how frequently and what you wish to replicate. So why replicate data between sites? Well, it makes life easy for the administrators to have the same policies and group structure if it applies to all the different database locations. If you have a multinational company that has a Europe office and a North America office, if they are set up in exactly the same way, then you can replicate the policies and group structure to make it easy for clients moving from one location to another. It's also good for data redundancy. It means you have a complete copy of all your policies and group settings in different locations. So how does replication work? So replication is done between the SEPMs. You set a SEPM to replicate with another partner SEPM. So one SEPM only at one site would replicate. We can see in the example here at London, we have two SEPMs that are sharing the same database. So it's the one SEPM at London that will replicate with the Paris SEPM. Replication, authentication, and communication. The site administrator password is required to establish the partnership replication. And you use the secure protocol to replicate the data across. And communication will take place on the port 8443. What is replicated? Well, we can set up the database containers. So we could group together the groups and policies and choose to replicate just those across. We could set up the content updates and the client packages to replicate across. And we can also set up logging to replicate. You could either do all or just the groups and policies. Here we can see the replication directions options. The different containers showing the policies, groups, the packages and the logs could all be bidirectional. The optional with logs could be unidirectional, i.e. just one way. Here we can see in this diagram with our Paris and London branches, the policies and groups are going both ways between the two sites. But the logging information is only going one direction. Paris logging information is going sent to London. This could be because the London office has all the security administrators and they would be using this information for analysis or reporting. there's a chance there could be some conflict when replication occurs. Maybe the Paris administrator creates a sales group at the same time as the London administrator does. And when replication occurs overnight, it could be that you'll then end up with two sales groups. And this is what could happen. You get a sales and the sales with the tilde 1, indicating there's a second one. When the two changes are represented as a single value, the most recent change is the one that's retained. So the replication mechanism, as in the timing-wise, we have a scheduled time arrive. The London request does the application first, then the servers exchange the certificates to ensure they're allowed to replicate the data. Then we have Paris retrieving the data from the database, and Paris data being dumped across to the disk and being zipped up and saved on the SEPM. The Paris notifies the London office that the data is ready to replicate. Paris sends the zipped data to London. London processes the file and resolves any conflicts that have occurred. London inserts that new data into their database and then repeats the steps to reverse the roles between Paris and London. So let's look at the protection replication scenarios. So here we've got basic replication, where we have a Munich office and a London office, and we're sharing all the policies and groups between the two sites. The two sites should have the same configuration, so therefore we will copy across all of the information. The management can be centralized or distributed. Now we have a centralized management scenario where we have the London office receiving all the information and London pushing out the changes to both Munich and Paris. London acts as a hub in this case. The Paris information doesn't go directly to Munich, it goes via London. Now we have the distributed management site where we do have the information transferring directly between Munich and Paris. This enables multiple sites very free access to each other and implements changes very quickly. It may be that you wish to have centralized logging, thinking about that London as being the main key site for analysis and reporting. So all the policies in groups are transferred and shared between the sites, but the logs only go one direction. This is the recommendation, as logging information is quite large and to be sent to one location only as opposed to multi-directional. Here we have the client packages and the content updates being shared, as well as the policies and groups. It may well be, if you have other methods of downloading the content and packages more locally with the Munich or Paris office, that you choose not to do this. Maybe you have an internal live update server local to Munich, for instance. So some replication best practices. Minimum number of sites for replication, ideally below 5, and definitely not above 10. Content distribution, use the GUPs for content distribution. They can manage up to 5,000 clients. Having SEPMs at each site retrieve content from the Symantec Live Update server. As I say, that's the local and best option. Log replication, not to replicate logs in both ways, only in one direction. And the frequency of replication, for more than 3 sites or 1,000 clients, no more frequent than once per day. And make sure you don't overlap the site replication with the live update schedule. So how do we configure replication? So we can use it within the management server configuration wizard. When we're doing the installation, we can set up the additional site, specifying the site and the server name, and specify the replication server at this state. We can examine the initial replication. We can look at the replicating database message. We can view the replication messages in the admin page underneath the servers to see the replication time and the fact that it's been successful. We can view it under the monitors and logs. System and server activity will also show replication logging information. So configuring replication. Here we can see underneath the View Servers site, we can see the replication partner, Site 2 DC, has been set up as a replicating partner with Site 1, SEPMOI. Underneath the site properties for Site DC2, we can see replicate logs have not been enabled. We can see that we are replicating the client packages and the live update content though. So replicating the logs, remember to consider the following: the number of clients that will be represented in the database, and the duration of time your installation has been in place, as there will be a lot of information there to replicate, certainly at the first time. The amount of time the database is configured to retain the data, as obviously the longer it's retaining the data, the more information to replicate. The types and size of events. So replicating client installation packages and content updates. They can be quite large in size, so as I say, be careful and consider that when you're deciding on your replication settings for the client packages and content. They are replicated by default though. So configuring the schedule for replication, we're looking at the site properties for Site DC2, and we can see here we've got replicate frequency set to daily at 12 AM. You could set auto-replicate for every 4 hours though, if you wish to. And if you accept the defaults to change your schedule in the screen, you must click OK for replication to occur. And there's some recommendations for 3 or more sites or over 1,000 clients, no more frequent than once a day. So managing replication partners, underneath the admin page in the servers tab, we can see we can manage the replication. We can force a replicate now to occur. We could delete a replication partner, and we can add an existing replication partner. And we can manage the remote sites. So for the server you can edit those properties and import and export the server properties. But for the database, you can only change the local name. So replication logging. So under the monitors page, under logs, system and server activity, we can see all the server activity that's occurring, and part of that is the replication. It may well be one of your daily tasks to check that replication has occurred and that it's been successful. We can also see this occurring at the console log messages underneath the admin and the servers page. We can see the SEPM debug log. We could debug this if we were having problems with the actual replication. We may well be we want to analyze this in the Windows Event Viewer also. The database logs may also be useful for troubleshooting. That could be found under the SQL Server log directory. Let's look at failover and load balancing now. Well, there's a number of different scenarios you can create for load balancing and failover. You need to think about your database in this case, and you need to really have a SQL Server database to get pure load balancing and failover features. Here we can see in this scenario we have SEPMOI, SEPMO2 and SEPMO3 all sharing the same database. So we could set up failover and load balancing very easily here to load balance the clients between the different SEPMs, or to fail over if one of the SEPMs went down. In this case though, if SEPMO1 went down and the database looks to be local to that system, then of course the database would be unavailable to all SEPMs. For true failover, you would need to have a separate SQL Server and possibly clustered. Installing and configuring for failover and load balancing. The first thing we need to do is install and start the SQL client on the second machine, and install and configure the SEPM on the second machine also. We need to configure that failover and load balancing, and then we need to apply that management server list to the clients. The management server list is what designates to the clients which SEPMs are available to it to connect to. So to get to that, we go to the Policies page, Policy Components, and Management Server Lists. We can add a new one, and we can add new SEPMs and set new priorities for them. If you set a priority 1 and click Add New Server, we can see we've added SEPM number 2. We've now added in a second priority in the example below with SEPM number 3. In that scenario with 2 priorities, we have failover set up. So SEPM 3 will fail over if SEPM 2 fails. If we were to create the SEPMs with the same priority, then it would be load balancing configured. So we have now learnt how to configure and manage replication and to remove the replication relationships and configure the SEPM for failover and load balancing.